important to sort of know what your client's job is and who they report to and what they can or may not be able to do because of the structure of their company. You might have some great ideas, but if the CEO doesn't like out of home, for example, you can certainly present it, but then you can't stake everything on it and say, well, if we don't do it, then the campaign's no good, knowing that he or she may not be able to sell it to his or her boss. So I think it's important to understand what the client's going through and how their organization is structured.
All right, welcome to Over a Pint, where we focus on the fast-paced, never-changing world of marketing told through the eyes of industry veterans with decades of in-the-trenches experience. No theory here on this show. This is real-world, practical experience told to you by those that have been there, and that always includes our guests. So grab a pint of your favorite local brewski or whatever your choice of drink may be, and join us for the show. As always, I am joined by my co-host, Pat McGovern, new biz director at Acedia, an award-winning digital shop here in Milwaukee. And I'm Kurtl, vice president at Celtic, a full-service award-winning ad agency headquartered in Milwaukee's historic Third Ward neighborhood. So, Pat, what number podcast are we on? What is this? What's your guess?
This will be 52.
52. I cannot believe that. Unbelievable. This has been an incredible ride. Just think about all of the super talented folks we've had on the show today, and it doesn't stop today because I know for a fact that you and I are both super pumped to welcome today's guest. Today we're chatting with David Kelly, a true advertising veteran who has experienced and accomplished a ton, specifically in the world of media. And my, oh my, how media has changed over the years, and we'll get into that. David's 42-year ad career has made some impactful pit stops at some great agencies like McCann Erickson, and most recently BBK, where for many years he served as their vice president and director of media. But today, as David likes to say himself, he's mostly retired, but continues to consult here and there, and obviously join us on the podcast today. David is definitely one of our blasts from the past. Pat, I know you worked with them at BBK.
That's right.
And David used to be one of my favorite guest speakers that I would bring into the classroom when I taught an advertising class at Carroll University. And he was always dynamite with the students. He always had a way of breaking down media in a very simple and easy way to comprehend. But what he also did, which I loved, he'd always find ways to weave in other life and career lessons that the students may not have bargained for, but would be very helpful to them post-graduation. And for example, I'm talking about writing skills, communication skills, presentation skills, just how to, present yourself in a meeting or an interview, soft skills. So no doubt, though, if media had been my calling, and I've told him this in the past, I would love to have been able to work for David or have him be my boss, because I think he's that fantastic, and I learn from him every single time we talk to him. So on that note, let's get him up here. David, welcome to Over a Pint.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the kind words. And if this is number 52, I guess you said that 51 people ahead of me, I've got some pretty big shoes to fill looking at who has been on the show before. I feel a little bit like a kazoo following the Philharmonic of Vienna, but I will try to live up to your expectations.
You will live up, you'll exceed our expectations, I have no doubt. You've got pretty big shoes too, so we're excited to have you. But David, before we get going, this show is called Over a Pint. We do call it that for a reason. Because before we start the show, we like to see what everyone has in their glass, what their choice of liquid may be: tea, water, coffee, brew, perhaps. David, what are you having today?
Well, I'm 68 years old, so a glass of Metamucil to start things off with, but actually have a bottle here of Labatt's Blue, non-alcoholic. So, okay.
Very good. Mr. McGovern, what do you got, Pat?
Guys, I want to talk about this one. I want to give these guys a plug. I got this from a friend of mine who by the guy by the name of Brian Caleb. And this was Wisconsin Brewing. And I got two 15 packs. And this is Badger Club. It's their amber. Man, is this good? Is this good? Like amber, I'm thinking more of a darker, maybe in the fall, winter type of thing. But man, I had this the other day and just fell in love with it. I got an IPA too. But Wisconsin Brewing, well done. The Badger Club Amber. That's what I'm putting back today.
Well, I'm looking forward to just going to throw that out there. Mr. McGovern promised to make a little gift drop at my house with some IPAs. He knows I love IPAs, so I'm looking forward to trying that. I am having a brew from MKE Brewing. It's their MVP, which is a hazy IPA. I'm a sucker for IPAs. I love IPAs. I've had this one before. It's a good beer, and if you've not been to their brewery before, it's pretty cool. So I advise everyone to kind of check it out. So cheers.
Wonderful.
Cheers, everybody.
What's the most exotic beer you guys have seen on your podcast?
Ooh, well, we've had some good ones. I don't know. We've been all over the world in some degree.
Victoria had a cool one. She had one from her
Louisiana.
Yeah, from Louisiana. That was pretty cool.
Yeah,
that was pretty cool.
When the guys from England were on too, they had some. Jason had some.
Yeah, he was drinking some pretty high octane stuff. So we've had a lot of good stuff, and we always plug it. But and if our guests want to send us beer, we also like that too. So, but let's get started. We're gonna kick this off, and David, I've got a lot of questions to ask you, as is Pat. But I guess the first place we always like to start with is this podcast is about marketing and branding, and whether it's PR, branding, creative, media, we're still storytellers. So I'd like to start off with you to just, if you could, in a very short manner, tell us what makes David tick. Tell us your story, if you could, in a few minutes, and then we'll kind of dive a little deeper.
Well, I started out in 1977 at McCann Erickson, as you mentioned. I started in August of that year, 9 days before Elvis died, in fact. So he was still with us when I started my career, but not for long. Was there, bounced around Chicago a little bit, in media, then was in Atlanta for a short time, and then came to Milwaukee to McDonnell Davis. And then that was merged or bought by BVK, and was there for a little over 30 years.
Wow.
Unbelievable. You've been in the industry for quite some time, and I guess one question I want to ask is, was this a situation where David fell into it by accident? I mean, some people just know this is going to be their course. I'm going into advertising, but I mean, how did you kind of like just fall into it and then stay and then stay?
I went to University of Kansas in the journalism school and took all the journalism classes. They had an advertising sequence, but once I was there, I could see that I really didn't want to pursue a journalism class and, start at a smaller paper and work up. I took some advertising classes and liked it. So I graduated in 76, and the economy was just like it is now. Inflation was as bad as it was 40 years ago, as they said today. Really couldn't find much of a job when I got out. They just weren't hiring. So I went to the University of Illinois for a year to finish up. It was great at the time. They had a 1-year master's program, all 3 semesters through the summer. Got through that, and then was able to find the job, and started, as I said, in 77 at the princely sum of $8,500 a year.
Wow. Holy cow.
That's kind of what they told me.
David, what was your first account that you were working on there?
It was, the first account no longer exists. It was a fast food franchise back in Pittsburgh and East Coast. But the first account that was mine to work on was a group called Walter E. Heller. It was a financial firm. And the reason they gave it to me, it was all trade and nobody wanted to work on it. Give it to him.
That's pretty cool. So I want to stay on this a little bit. So obviously, we all, our careers are advertising, and we've been in agencies or, very, in Pat's case, he was in the advertising agency industry. He's with a digital firm. So it's the same world pretty much, but
Yep.
there's so many different legs to the world of advertising. There's public relations, there's branding, there's creative, there's social media, but your world really focused in on the media. How did that happen? Was that just, again, it's like, how did that discipline kind of find you, or you find it and it just stuck? How did that happen?
When I started, it was pretty much media, account service, and creative, and the agency may or may not have had a PR arm. And again, it was 3 networks. It was not nearly as complex as it is now. And in a lot of times, Leo Burnett was famous for this as well, and other bigger agencies. Media was kind of the funnel that you went into, and you could stay there for 6 months or a year. And if they wanted to recruit you into account service, or if you did have a creative bent, you could go that way. Usually the creative guys kind of stayed with their own folks in creative, whereas account service, some of those people did come out of media. And so that's where you sort of got funneled in, and that's quite frankly where the job was. So I took it, and I like media. I enjoyed what I was doing. Probably the biggest change since then, not only just that the explosion of media, but the fact that media people now are in more client meetings than they've ever been. When I started, it was pretty rare that you would go to a client meeting because you basically had a flow chart. And unless the client had a lot of specific questions, the account person would present it.
Yeah.
Do you think, David, that's interesting. So do you think that, having said that, with the role of a media practitioner professional, with their role being more clients, with having more client interaction, what kind of skills are you seeing that are important then to pick up? Because obviously, if, going back in time, if that wasn't the role, if client service, customer service, building relationships, networking, things like that probably didn't need to be a big part of their toolkit. Now,
at the beginning, now it's entirely different.
Yeah.
Now, I think the first thing you have to kind of work on with your clients is trust, because basically, as a media person, I've always looked at it as you're kind of an investment counselor. Just as you might have one in your personal life to say, hey, you want to go here, you want to go there with this stock, these bonds, these mutual funds. You walk into a room, especially in a new business pitch, and the client's looking at you going, I'm going to give that person $15 million of my money to invest. The first thing is I better trust them and feel that they, are smart enough to be able to do that. And can communicate and that type of thing. So I think that's probably the key. And then a lot of it too is basically a lot of media people have become kind of quasi account people, because, and Pat, you saw this when we would work together, you would present the marketing plan and then I would present the media. Yeah. Because they wanted to see the whole team. And a lot of times clients now call the media people direct. And it's not to bypass account service. It's just, well, I want the answer from the media guys, so I don't really have to go through the account person to get that.
Are you seeing, David, in terms of, like, I guess, because I've known you, I have not had a chance to work with you like Pat has, but I've known you for a good number of years, and you get a sense of someone's personality and their DNA. And I know, I can just tell relationship building, is a very big part of who you are. How in your opinion do agencies build that trust? Or, because a lot of times you see it being very transactional, which I think is a flaw, but in terms of like how do you build that trust? What have you done to build that trust? Because you obviously had to change over the years too. What do you do?
Well, it takes a lot of time. It's not something you can instantly, you go through the scenario that you pitch the new business, you win the account, you have the orientation meeting. That first year is pretty crucial just to get to know your client. And I've always thought too, it's important to sort of know what your client's job is and who they report to and what they can or may not be able to do because of the structure of their company. You might have some great ideas, but if the CEO doesn't like out of home, for example, you can certainly present it, but then you can't stake everything on it and say, well, if we don't do it, then the campaign's no good. knowing that he or she may not be able to sell it to his or her boss. So I think it's important to understand what the client's going through and how their organization is structured.
Pat, I'd throw you in that ballpark too. I have a lot of respect for David and his relationship building skills. I think, Pat, you're extremely good at it as well. I've known you for many years, and both of you, your relationship building skills are, in my opinion, are phenomenal. And I think that trust happens organically.
Yeah, you know, David, that's one of the things I've noticed from just hanging around you and just listening to your stories is that you really seem to have a good understanding of kind of new business, I would say. So did you ever think like, wow, maybe some regrets about staying so much into the media space? Did you ever think about going into the account side or doing anything like that?
I was offered a couple times at Wells Rich Green.
Okay.
They wanted to stay. They called me in and said, "Hey, have you ever thought about account service?" And I said, "No, I haven't."
Yeah.
Why do you ask? Well, we thought you would be good on the account side. I just preferred media. I liked monkeying with the numbers. I liked proving points to clients. And I think the one advantage of media is it's a lot more black and white. You can prove why your schedule is good by looking at the metrics, the reach and frequency, the impressions, the click-throughs, the everything now that's going on with the digital side of things. Account service, you kind of had to keep the client happy, and it's probably the toughest job in an agency, quite honestly, because you got to keep the creatives happy, which can be difficult, and you've got to communicate everything to media. You're responsible for the profitability, so you got to keep the boss happy that you're not writing off a lot of time on your account, and in addition to keeping the client happy.
Right.
So yeah. I always preferred the media side. I always found it interesting, how everything came together. And again, back when I was sort of in the middle of my career, media was expanding, but not like it is now. Media's become a ton more difficult than it was even 5 or 10 years ago.
The one thing when David would come into the class, it was kind of interesting, and I thought was really cool. So obviously, David, you would talk about media and you would talk about certain things. We'd kind of have some talking points, but the thing that I always liked is every single time David came in, he also talked about new business. And so our aim really was to this was an introductory advertising class. So it was great for David to talk about media. He talked about how agencies operate, but I think going back, David, to what you said earlier, how agencies used to operate, or maybe what they're known for, if people just watch Mad Men, they don't realize it's all of these things. And you would talk about new business. And I don't know if that's something that, you really read a lot about or learn a lot about in an ad class, but it's critical. And people who are in various disciplines are constantly pulled into new business. It's not like it's just a new business person. It's David Kelly from media. It's Pat McGovern, who's coming in from the account management side, because Pat is super smart, has those kind of skills.
Yeah, it's the lifeblood. You guys know this, especially Kurt, with you running the place. It's the lifeblood of an agency. You've got to keep that pipeline full, because you never know when a client's going to have a budget cut, or the marketing director's going to leave and somebody else comes in who knows somebody in another agency. Sometimes you win accounts that way, and sometimes you lose them. It's not really fair either way, but that's the nature of the business.
Yeah. Hey, David, let's talk about digging a little bit more on your background, because one of the things I'm really interested in is when you started off, you said 76, right?
77, yeah.
Yep. So, the media world was a lot different than it is right now, right? Yeah. But you've been in it from 76 for a long time. What I'm really interested in is when digital started becoming a thing, how long, from your standpoint, did it take to say, hey, time out, this is going to be a thing, right? Because there's always that initial, like, is this going to be just a flash in the pan? Like 2 years from now, we're not ever going to remember the World Wide Web, right? Yeah. At what point do you remember, like, was there that moment when the light bulb went off and going, holy cow, we got something here?
Yeah, If you look at the history of media, the internet is just one more thing that has come along and stuck around. And what I mean by that is, if you go back to the turn of the 19th to the 20th century, you had newspapers and you had magazines. Those were the two big media. And, every city had 2 or 3 newspapers and things like that. In 1920, radio came along and the movies, and radio was there. People would sit around and listen to radio shows at night like they watch television shows now.
Yeah.
Then after World War II, TV was invented. And everybody thought, oh, that's going to kill the radio because nobody's going to listen to the radio anymore. They're going to watch TV. Well, they put radios in cars. Fast forward another 15 years to the mid 60s, cable TV came about after World War II, but that was mainly to improve reception of the 3 network affiliates. I mean, it started in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. A guy was stringing cable because in the valleys, you couldn't get a TV signal. Then in the mid 70s, Ted Turner was one of the primary drivers, but he was thinking, I can put this up on a satellite and I can broadcast my local station all over the country. With Channel 17, the superstation. And then he started CNN, and then cable started to roll, and that cut into TV, but it didn't kill it. Everybody thought it would. And then fast forward now to the late 1990s, early 2000s, as you said, the internet came on. In the beginning, it was very crude. You really couldn't track all that much, except people went to this site or whatever.
Yep.
And then what's happened is it just exploded when you had search. When that was invented, you had search. I mean, display has gone from being the main part of the internet 25 years ago to now it's probably the fourth behind social, search, and then video. And so it is really, while every other medium has affected the others, I think the internet has had the biggest effect of all in the past 120 years. Just because it has really changed so much. A good example is today's Brewers game. If you want to watch the game, you got to watch it on YouTube. It's only on a streaming service. Major League Baseball signed up with Apple TV that on Friday nights, the game of the week is on your streaming service, and that's it. And DirecTV is losing the NFL ticket, and that's going to go to a streaming service. So the way things have changed and the impact of especially the internet on television is just amazing.
Do you, though, David, do you remember, like, and maybe there wasn't, I'm not trying to push something that wasn't, but do you remember that point, though, when the internet's starting to get critical mass, where you start having to think, it's like, this is something we're going to have to reorganize and shift how we think about the business and how we buy media differently. Like, we're going to need to get different people in here. We're going to have to start, Yeah,
it was probably the early 2000s. And I think what really pushed it along was when you saw how much commerce could be done on the internet. First as almost a retail thing with the Amazons and everybody else, but the fact that so many people were now buying on eBay or on Amazon, you could see that the internet was taking off, and it was just a matter of time before advertising caught up to it a little bit more.
Yep.
Ian, Dave, kind of on the heels of, I think, with the explosion of digital and the internet and how that's impacted the world of media, the two things we continuously hear on the podcast from our guests, it's accountability. Every dollar that we spend needs to be held accountable and measurable. Obviously, that directly pertains to media. And the other thing we hear a lot about, too, is the need to move fast. Gone are the days when we would dream up a beautiful campaign and off it went and it would just play. And I mean, move, and do it fast. What's your perspective and how have you seen that?
It exactly that way. It used to be that from a media perspective, if you wanted to do a full-blown plan, you would get 4 to 6 weeks after you got all the input from account service, being the budget, the target audiences, and then talking with the creative folks and seeing what they were thinking. Those days are gone. 6 weeks is an eternity now. It's pretty much turn it around in a hurry. The plus side is you have better tools to do that, but still, my biggest concern about that move, hurry is you don't get a few minutes to just sort of sit back and think, what's the best way to go with this? And look at different alternatives and things like that, because I think that's one of the downsides of the speed. Yes, the client gets it quickly as they want, but they may not get it as thoroughly as if they gave a little bit more time where you could kick around some ideas, with the creative folks or with the account service that's, hey, I'm thinking about going this route. What do you think? Can you make that work? It's just, no, we got to get this out the door. So here you go.
Yeah. A big part of the show that we pump up in the cold read is real world experience, which is true. The guests we bring on are bringing just some deep experiences and successes and really just a background to the table. So on that note, real world experience, can you share with us maybe a war story, if you will, some sort of success story, something that you were a part of from a media perspective where you look back and you're like, this was something I'm incredibly proud to have been a part of. It's whether it was a campaign that you were part of, whether it was a piece of new business that you helped land. Give us like an example of something that just sticks out like, wow, I love telling this story.
Yeah, it's interesting, Kurt. If you'd asked me that, I've been basically retired for 3.5 years. I still do a little bit of stuff, but not much. If you'd asked me that question 4 years ago, I would have said, oh, when we went down and pitched this account, or when we did this or that. When you have the advantage that I do, that you look back on your 40 years, you sort of remember the pitches and the big stories and stuff like that. But what I've found is when I look back at that, it's more the people I was with that really stand out, and the friendships that I've had. Literally last week, we met with some folks here at the house, known them for 40 years. I started in advertising with them. So you have these relationships that you form over the years with people, both young and old, depending on the staff and everything. So that's what kind of stands out the most. I guess in terms of a war story, we had pitched a big client and won it. And they sent me their old media plan. And I had done the research to find out, okay, who's their target audience? What are their media habits? All that sort of thing. It was entirely different than what they had approved in the past. I mean, they were heavy TV, very little print. This was prior to the internet. Just heavy TV all over the place on a national basis. And when I looked at their target audience, the MRI and the data I looked at said, these guys don't watch much TV. They're very light TV viewers. So, and this was, $10-12 million. And so I went into the account guy, and I happened to still be friends with him. He's a great guy. And I just said, we got an issue. He said, what's that? And I said, everything I'm looking at presenting to them is the exact opposite of what they've done. And he said, well, why is that an issue? And I said, well, because they've approved all these plans in the past. It's the same people. So I'm going to stand up there and basically say everything you've approved in the past is wrong. And that's where I'm a little edgy about going in. And I remember what he said. He said, they fired their other agency and hired us for a reason. Do what you think is right, and let's see what happens. And I did present it. And the room was quiet afterwards. And nobody said anything. And I'm like, oh boy. And it took them a while. And they said, this is very different than we're used to seeing. I said, yes. And it's all based on the research that I presented. And they said, no, this makes a lot of sense. Thanks for going to the depth. But I mean, for a few minutes there, I was getting a little bit of the queasy stomach, thinking I might be getting fired when I got back to Milwaukee. But again, it's the relationships that we formed. I mean, Pat, I've known you for, 20 years. Kurt, I've known you for a long time. And I just think when you look back on your career, once it's behind you, what really sticks out isn't so much the clients that you worked on, but it's the relationships and the friendships that you formed.
good answer. Seems fair. That example you shared, obviously the client's nameless, and we'll leave it nameless. I respect that. But the one thing I am picking up as I'm listening to your story too is, it's that whole thing where it's also in the how, not just the what. And I would be willing to bet that David Kelly, it's like you put two different individuals going down to wherever you were going to share the news with this client, how you shared that news, how you shared your rationale makes a big difference. And I think it gets back to the soft skills. It's like it's a matter of the trust, as we said earlier. And if David's delivering it in such a way where it's comfortable, I trust that voice, all of a sudden that recommendation passes through. Same recommendation coming from a different voice because it's in a different tone, it just hits the floor.
Well, thank you. I think that helps, but I think the other thing too is I've seen presentations where we've gone in and sometimes, and I've seen them both participating and then also just hearing about them from other clients, that we sort of go in as we are the experts, we know everything, and if you don't go along with this, you're crazy. And I think there's got to be some give and take that, in some cases, like we had one client who didn't like dogs, so don't put dogs in the spot. It sounds silly, but if you're going to sell something and there's a dog and he hates dogs, you basically shot yourself in the foot. So a lot of it is kind of listening to the client and not. I've seen people, if they have a digital schedule or a magazine schedule or whatever, and a client doesn't like a particular publication, for example, or a particular website, well, we can't be in that. It might be because, and I learned this years ago on the client Selsun Blue that I worked on. I had presented a magazine schedule, and I believe it was Newsweek was on there, and the client says, we're not running in there. And I said, well, okay, but why? And he pointed out that a year ago, they had run an article on cancer-causing elements in products. And one of them that was mentioned was Selsun Blue. And he said, so we're never running in that magazine again. Do you understand? And it was like, sure, I get that. That's when you don't fight back. You just realize that's not a battle that you're going to win.
Yeah.
And clients don't like to fight with their agencies that much. It's the art of the give and take. It's a negotiation for the most part.
Yeah. I would imagine too that that's exactly why some agencies get fired. Because, it's like we always use the analogy around here. It's like our world, the world that we all live in, you, me, Pat, it's your world. We're running a marathon. The world of marketing, branding, it's a marathon we're running with our clients, and it's not a sprint. And I always say it's like running a marathon is grueling. It can just be a drag. You better enjoy who you're running that marathon with if we're going through that pain together, because if I don't enjoy it, I'm going to run it with someone else. And what you're describing is, it's like, exactly. It's like, let's not build headaches unnecessarily, because those will come on their own. That's just the way it is in our industry.
You can
David, go ahead. I'm sorry, please.
I didn't mean to cut you up. You can always pick up the phone afterwards and call the client. I had another case where I did this plan and sent it, and I thought it was, pretty good. And the client liked it. And then the client called me and said, well, we sent it to management and you got to get rid of all this stuff. And I said, okay. I said, we can do that, but we might as well start over because they basically gutted the plan.
Right.
I mean, my numbers are going to be cut in half or more. I said, is there anything we can do? And she said, look, if you write up your rationale again, I'll take it up to them and explain why we're in these publications that they want to cut. And see, so again, there's that, the give and take, that the client's not going to fight on their own pretty much with their boss. But if the agency comes in and says, well, I think we should be in these publications for these reasons. Oh, okay, that makes sense. A lot of times it's just sitting down with the person in management. And while we may not have the access to them, the client does, but you give them enough to go on that they can go in and say, I really think we should be in these publications that you've asked. I mean, Magazines and now websites are the ones that get the clients probably the most involved because everybody has an opinion on that publication or that website because they're consumers of it. Nobody will fight with you if you say you're buying 125 points a week.
Right. Good point. Good point. Hey, David, I want to talk a little bit about just media and how much it's changed. And here's my first question is, would you agree with the fact that of the departments, the key departments within an agency, creative, account service, and media has changed the most?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
To me, there's no doubt about it because the art of creative is still that you want to communicate the message in an entertaining and targeted way. Account service hasn't changed that much since when I started in the 70s, and that your job is you're basically to coordinate within the agency to make sure that everybody's on the same page, keep the client happy, and as I said, keep the bosses happy with the profitability of the account. But media has just changed so much that, as I mentioned earlier, clients call the media people direct now. Media is probably a little bit more in the vein of account service just because of all the client exposure that the media people have.
Yeah.
And it's because I think it's become so complex.
Yeah.
The team wants the media person there in the meeting or in a new business pitch just to talk about, hey, this is our approach, because it's just the internet has just changed everything.
So to that point, David, I don't know, and Kurt, maybe this is for both of you guys, really. Are kids coming out of school right now, going into media, are they prepared for this? I mean, do they know what's going on and how to buy media? I mean, it just seems like it's changing and evolving so fast that, universities aren't necessarily known for their speed and their, keeping up with trends, right?
Yeah, I think, Pat, it depends on the school that you come out of. If you go to a school like a Michigan State, a Northwestern, and Illinois, Kansas had a pretty good advertising program underneath that journalism umbrella. I think they're teaching a little bit more about how media works. But in terms of when you start your first day, I think in a lot of cases, you just pretty much have to say, I'm a blank slate, show me what I need to learn.
Yep.
Probably the biggest adjustment in media is learning how to negotiate, because that's not something we really do except for a car or a house. You don't go cruising into Best Buy going, yeah, that TV's $800, I'll give you $725 for it. You
Right.
can, and you might get the $725, but it is just so much not a part of our culture, except for those two big ticket items I mentioned, that people don't know how to do that.
David, when you were at BVK and working with the team there, and especially with the newer kids coming in,
Yep.
right? How would you go about teaching negotiation? I'm just curious. I never thought about that, but I'm just curious.
A lot of times you have them sit in and listen, and don't say anything, but just listen to how it's done. That and I'll use a TV example. Look, I can't come off my rate for 60 minutes, but I can give you a couple of early news units as a bonus. Okay, let's do that and throw in a late news, and just so they can kind of see how it goes. And you give them the smaller markets. You kind of laugh, but it's the Glendive, Montanas that people buy, because if they make a mistake, probably between the three of us, we have on our billfolds enough money to cover it, because the spots are, $5 or $10 each. They usually start with radio as well, because that again can kind of go back and forth. The problem is, and what I'm hearing from a lot of guys, and you might have the same situation, finding broadcast buyers is getting more and more difficult, because everybody's gravitating over to the internet side of things.
I was going to ask that. David, is like, are there people who know how to buy just billboards and magazine ads anymore, or is that like, does that like something that people learn anymore? Or?
They're becoming fewer and far between.
Yeah.
Now, the odd part was when I started my career, magazines, there were no negotiations. It was pretty much, our page is $40,000. If you buy 3 of them, we'll knock it down to 35. They might throw in a bonus unit or something like that. But then in the 80s, McCall's was the first magazine to say, I'm not using a rate card anymore. We'll just negotiate based on the audience out of an MRI or a Simmons data. And so then everybody kind of went that route. But now you
Wow.
look at it, and there are so few magazines.
Yeah.
Many more have gone away, and newspapers are even sadder. I mean, the number of papers, they're just, I read the other week that there are 2 newspapers dying every week in this country, mainly weeklies now, because
Yeah.
most of the dailies have gone by the by. In a major market like Detroit, you have a printed version 3 or 4 days a week. That's it. The rest of it's all digital.
Got it.
So I think one of the key things for media people is to be able to teach. And it kind of gets back to your point, Kurt, that we're in this hurry up world, that sometimes the time isn't there to teach. And we owe it to the younger people to do that, because we all learn from people coming up through the ranks, and and they're looking for help and for mentors and things like that. And then they will become the same as their career advances.
David, on that note, I guess, and Pat, you kind of asked, you were kind of getting into it. I guess as new advertising career folks are coming into the field, students that are cutting out of college and basically they want to go into advertising. I mean, what advice would you give them? Because you've been in the game for a while. You've got someone fresh out of school, whether it's Michigan State or wherever. Yep. It's like, you know what? I want to get into advertising. That seems like, what would you tell them? And then how do they get in? And it's like, what advice do you give them? It's like, okay,
well, the first
here's how you have to be successful.
Is why, because I'm afraid everybody watch Mad Men and think we sit around and drinking and smoking in our offices all day. Mm-hmm. And they all want to be Don Draper. It's like, well, why do you want to? I'm interested in it. Okay. My advice is just, you've got to learn as much as you can. Ask a lot of questions. I think the worst thing is when people come in, and even in an interview, and they don't ask questions. Mm-hmm. And you'll find out pretty quickly when somebody comes on board, if they've got it. And I had the great opportunity to work with a lot of younger people, and you'd see some of these guys come in, and they were enthusiastic. They wanted to learn. They were willing to learn. They asked a bunch of questions. And then there were others who just were much more, I don't know if timid's the right word, but they just sort of were there and would do what you asked them, but wouldn't take it to the next step.
Sure. Yeah.
Years ago, we worked, when I was at McDonnell Davis, with some people in Japan. And one of the folks came over and was talking to us about the difference between, again, this was 1990, Americans and Japanese in the workplace. What this fellow said was that in Japan, if you give somebody 8 things to do, they will do those 8 things and do them very, very well. And then they stop at 8. He said the big difference in America, what we found, is if you give somebody 8 things to do, the good ones will do the 8 and then ask about number 9 and number 10. It's just the way our culture is, very different than what it was in Japan, where it was very much, I did the 8 and I did them very well, so I've done my job. You're looking for those people who will do 9 and 10 and come to you and think, I saw these numbers and this is what it indicated to me.
I love that. I love that perspective. And there's a difference between order takers. What do you want? I want eggs and bacon and toast. Great, I'll give it to you. Versus like, you know what? I'll give you the eggs, bacon, and toast, but you know what else you need? I'd like, that what else? We see that all the time. One of my final questions for you, David, is it's kind of a fun question. So I want you to take your practical hat off. Let's assume that you're working with all the people that you love, because you've told us that it's about the people, right?
Yep. So
all the stars align, but is there an industry out there? Is there a brand out there that you just love it? It's like, I love this brand. I love this industry. And if I was starting my own agency, I would love to have that be my first client if someone just handed it off to me, because I'd love to work on it. I think it's cool.
Yeah, and full disclosure, we're friends, but it's been somebody you've had on your podcast before. And that was, I'm intrigued by what the state of Nevada or Nebraska is doing, basically coming out and saying, we're not for everyone. And I had worked with both Jennifer and Victoria in pulling the media research for John Ricks, but to come out, because so many travel destinations, and you see it now on TV for Rosemont, Illinois, we have it all. Well, that's so broad-based. Yeah, we have a lot of stuff, but for Nebraska to say, we're not for everybody, it takes a lot of guts to run an ad like that. And I can only imagine John going into the governor to present the campaign, because, the governors sometimes sign off on him. I suspect the governor did there, but I think that campaign really kind of talks to you saying, yeah, I don't really care much about the hiking or the history or anything, so maybe Nebraska isn't for me. Because so many destinations, they try to paint themselves as all things to all people.
Yep.
And I've been really intrigued by that. I know it's continuing. It was starting to be successful, but when the pandemic hit, as we said, before we came on, that has changed so many things in our culture. Not to discount the sickness and the lives lost. I mean, that was the main thing. But the fact that, we're all sitting at home. And will we ever go back to the office? I know I won't, but probably not.
Yeah.
The companies that have tried to come down on people saying you're going to be in the office, the workers say, well, then I guess I'm going to go find another job. And just what it's done to, the amount of home entertainment we have now. When you look at all the streaming services and things like that, one thing that I had pulled before we came on, when I started, most primetime shows did like a 20 rating, 25 rating. Anything less than a 20 and you got bounced off the air. Right now, if you take Sunday Night Football and Thursday Night Football out, the leading show this past television year was that program This Is Us on NBC.
Mm-hmm.
You guys want to take a guess as to what the rating was for 18 to 49?
7.
On average? 7? Mr. Lingle?
5.
1.5.
Wow.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
And one of the implications of that is for the creative department, because when you have ratings that low and you buy 100 points a week, it used to be if you did an average 4 rating, that was 25 spots. Now you're running 70 to 80 spots. You better have more than one execution or you're going to drive people nuts with the same ad.
Yeah.
Right.
Which drives up your production cost.
Yep. Interesting.
David, I guess as we always do as we wrap up here, first of all, this has been awesome having you on. We touched a lot of bases, and there's which I think is cool. But as we wrap up, and as we always do with all of our guests, any question you wish we would have asked you, anything that you want to leave to our listeners, final words, go to you. What say you?
Well, thank you. First off, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. It was fun again to see both you guys again, because it has been a while. Kurt, I don't think we've seen each other for probably before the pandemic.
Yeah.
And Pat, I know we've had breakfast a few times, which is great. I think these podcasts are wonderful. I think it gives everybody a chance to kind of understand the marketing and things like that. In terms of final words, I guess what I would say is in the agencies, the best thing that we can do as the veterans are teach the younger folks who are coming up how to do our jobs. So as I said, we all had people that helped us, and with the teaching, we can certainly help them as well. And I've always found it very gratifying that some of the people that you did help and teach have gone on to other agencies and are just doing great.
Cool.
Pat, was this a good one or what?
Was a great one. Always good talking to David.
Yeah.
Love him.
Well,
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, thank you. It was good talking to you guys. This wasn't half as bad as I thought it was going to be.
You did fantastic. So there you have it, folks. Another episode of Over a Pint. That was with David Kelly, our guest today. And David, we thank you very genuinely for coming on the show and sharing some time with us. Till next time, cheers, everyone.
Well,
Thanks,
you.
David.
Take care.